Welcome to the Transatlantic Sports Show. I'm your host, Anthony Wootton. Thank you very much for watching and listening to this episode of our podcast. You can find us on social media at TASS_UK. The details, if you're watching on YouTube, are below on your screen. And I am at ARWootton, WOOTTON on X. Coming up in this special episode, we're going to be looking back on the Philadelphia Eagles celebrations. They were partying hard on Valentine's Day. A lot of love in the city of brotherly love, which is kind of ironic given the hatred that was shown towards their head coach. Maybe hatred is too strong a word. Nick Sirianni at the start of the season. Let's not forget, after week 4, he was arguing with the fans in the stands. And then they went on a fantastic run, which saw them lift the Lombardi Trophy last Sunday, the 9th of February, at the Caesars Superdome, Super Bowl 59 champions. Where does this compare to the Super Bowl victory of 2018? My special guest, Marcus Hayes of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I will discuss. So let's get to it, shall we? Here's our guest, Marcus Hayes. So the streets of Philadelphia, you would hope, have been swept now. They were clearing up the vomit long after the confetti was cleared up off the field at the Caesars Superdome in New Orleans. A few days after that glorious 40 points to 22 victory over the Kansas City Chiefs, the revenge for the defeats of Super Bowl 57, they got their rewards, lifting the Lombardi in New Orleans to the delight of Philadelphia fans and fans throughout Pennsylvania, perhaps not the Pittsburgh part of Pennsylvania, but still, you get the drift. But long before the parade, we were seeing scenes of fans puking up on the streets of Philadelphia. They say it's 12 o'clock somewhere. It was pretty much 9 o'clock in the morning when that was taking place. But amongst it all was our roaming reporter and friend of the show, Marcus Hayes of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Marcus, welcome to the show. How is Philadelphia looking and smelling this Tuesday morning?
Philadelphia is a veteran city of, hijinks and miscreant behavior. So I was actually there. I was in the city by 6 o'clock. You could never tell it happened. The parade speeches went off around 2:30, and the city was normal by 6.
There we go. All right. And how's the GM's Howie Roseman's head? We've seen that beer can flying over and smacking him on the head. There's quite a bruise. I think he's going to wake up. Well, I'm saying he's just going to wake up in the morning. He probably woke up Saturday morning and thought, what the heck is going on with this big shiner on the middle of his forehead?
Well, as most GMs in the NFL will tell you, he is particularly hard-headed. So he didn't seem any the worse for wear from the minute it happened on. And it was funny. He understood what the moment was going to be, and he put an unlit cigar in his mouth and refused to have any sort of medical attention until they got to the art museum, because he was going to milk the moment, and that he did.
That he did. And some, and he'll be milking it long into the combine, which is coming up in just a few days' time. No doubt.
Just so your listeners and viewers know, there was a crescent-shaped scar of blood on his forehead for probably 2.5 hours, and he walked through the parade, got off the bus where he got hit, and walked through the parade to show it off. Like, this was completely contrived. This was completely like, hey, look at me, I'm a tough guy. And again, I know that your audience isn't necessarily aware of Howie Roseman in a grand scheme. Howie's about 5 foot, maybe 6, maybe 5'7", maybe 150 pounds. He's not like what you think of when you think of the NFL and the football industry. So this tough guy moment was big for him.
He's no Jalen Carter, let's put it that way. He's probably about half the size.
If that, right, yeah.
But he's like, hey, I'm the guy who got you him.
That's
so,
right.
Look, I'm taking this moment. Yeah, fair play to him as well. He soaked it up. He lapped it up, which, all credit where it's due to him. Because he built that roster, didn't he, for Nick Sirianni and co. And what a roster build it's been. How does this Super Bowl victory compare to Super Bowl 52? Of 2018. How were the fans responded to this win compared to that one?
Two different questions. So I'll do the second one first. I'll answer the second question first. The fans in 2017/18, I mean, that was it. That was they were delivered to heaven, and they were delivered to heaven by a goofy second-year coach and a backup quarterback. So they knew it was kind of lightning in a bottle. They knew that going into the next season, they wouldn't be considered favorites to win. They wouldn't be considered, there was no. It was kind of a one-off, one and done. They hoped it was, quote unquote, the new norm. That's what Doug Peterson, the coach, called it. But most people understood it wasn't. They had a huge roster overhaul. None of the running backs came back, for instance. One of the running backs came back, a rookie came back, but I think he got hurt. It was a nice moment. And it kind of underscored the, any team can get hot ethos that is the NFL sometimes. This year is very different. This year, the team is younger. I think it had the youngest defense in the league and was the number one defense in the league. Howie Roseman was coming off a year of exile and a year of failure, and nobody was sure what his future was, except that he'd won the Super Bowl. Now he's been to 3 Super Bowls in 7 years, and he has, to answer your first question, the best roster in the NFL, a very, very good coach, a very, very good quarterback, an owner who spends cash up front. They're the best team in the league and should be for at least another year or two. So that's the difference in the feeling. The first one was like, okay, we finally made it. The second one is like, this should be the new norm. We're validated. We're real. It's similar to, if you have any Philadelphia fans in your audience, the feeling of the 2008 World Series when the Phillies won and had money to spend and actually won more games going forward the next few years. That was the golden era. They made it back to the World Series in 2009. They won 100 and some games in 2011. It was just a wonderful time to be a Phillies fan. That's what the expectation here in Philadelphia is now with this group of Eagles.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you go back 2 years, Super Bowl 57, I was there in Arizona, and you had that iffy call towards the end, and I'm sure Eagles fans, look back on that call against them, the penalty, the holding call towards the end, which led to the game-winning field goal, put the Chiefs into a strong position, didn't it, at the end of Super Bowl 57. And then the following season, so the 2023 season, let's not forget, the Eagles went 10-1. Then the 49ers came to town, and it all seemed to fall apart after that. Okay, their defense wasn't as good. It was nowhere near as strong as it is this season. They brought in Vic Fangio for this season, and the masterclass we all saw firsthand in the Super Bowl, just how brilliant Fangio has been. But throughout this season, I think the Eagles were the only defense in the whole of the NFL to average to hold teams to less than 200 net yards per game throughout the entire season, which just shows how strong that defense, that Vic Fangio defense, has been. But was it the defense in 2023 that was the cause for that collapse? I know you can point it at different things, different nuances. You had Saquon Barkley in 2024, Vic Fangio's defense, as we said, but a lot of these young players like Jalen Carter, I guess towards the end of that season, we saw that rookie rust, didn't we, towards the end of 2023, which I think also impacted. But what I'm getting at is that success has been building since the year of Super Bowl 57, where they came so close to winning it. And then last year, they had an awesome start. 10-1, they were the number one seed in the NFC right towards the end of the season, and then it all just kind of imploded. And then bang, 2024, after an iffy start. We'll talk about the start of the season to 2024, because let's not forget they went into the bye 2-2. But they seemed to gain momentum. It was almost the antithesis, wasn't it, of 2023, 2024, where they had their slow start, but then they went on this incredible run, whereas the year before they started off on a really good run. So, collectively, if you look back on the last, 2-3 seasons, this Eagles team have been there, haven't they? As a dominant force. at different stages throughout the season, but this seemed to really come together, and we saw it just peak at the right time, which was in New Orleans.
Well, yeah, I mean, also in 2021, they made the playoffs. They got blown out in the playoffs, but with a second-year, first-time starting quarterback who was a second-round pick, Jalen Hurts, and a head coach nobody had heard of, Nick Sirianni, they were good. Then they were really good. They made it to the Super Bowl and maybe should have won. What happened in, I think it was game 11 of 2023, it was kind of a, I don't know, it was kind of a car crash. And it all happened against the Bills. And they beat the Bills in overtime in Philly in some weather, I think. And Jordan Davis, the second-year defensive tackle, Jalen Carter, the guy you keep talking about, it was a rookie last year and was having a splendid season, and Fletcher Cox, the defensive tackle who retired after 2023, they kind of went off a cliff. So Jordan Davis played too many snaps in that game and kind of hit a rookie wall. Even though it was second season, he didn't play all of his first season. So he didn't know what it was like to play 12, 13, 14, 15 games kind of in a row. Jalen Carter, same thing. He's a rookie. He hit a rookie wall. And Fletcher Cox got injured. Now, Fletcher Cox is and was probably the most important player of his era. If Lane Johnson, the right tackle, the offensive lineman, isn't. So even last year, in his final season, he was playing pretty well. So when you talk about the defense collapsing, and yeah, they had two defensive coordinators last year that didn't do a very good job. But they lost their strength up the middle. All three of those players I talked about, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Fletcher Cox, are defensive tackles and like played in the starting rotation. They were very, very key. So that, to me, is the biggest issue. There are other issues. Jalen Hurts, the quarterback, started turning the ball over. The locker room became fractured. A.J. Brown was having histrionics on the field, and some of his teammates didn't like that. Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown were calling their own plays. It was a mess. There are lots of issues. For me, the biggest issue is always which players didn't play well and why. Those three defensive tackles didn't play well. Two hit the rookie wall. One got hurt, and they never recovered. So you fast forward, you're talking about building. What happened to change things? Well, Fletcher Cox retired, but that didn't help the team necessarily. He's still a very good player. But Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis got in much better shape and stayed in shape all season. I don't know if this happens in other sports that your audience is familiar with, but they have to make weight every week. Like, they get fined if they don't weigh a certain amount, if they're too heavy. They're not the only players on the team or the only players in the league, but players with weight problems have it written into their contracts. They have to make weight. So they were much more professional. And that is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. If you want to talk about why they got to where they are, I wrote a column today ranking the overachievers. And, they drafted in the first and second round, they drafted two cornerbacks who started every game down the stretch. Quinyon Mitchell, the first-round pick, he was the third best cornerback in passer rating against in the NFL. That's ridiculous to have a rookie do that. I mean, again, playing defensive back, especially playing cornerback, is the hardest thing to do as a rookie. There's nothing harder. And he was not only good, he was spectacular. He had one of the best seasons in the history of the franchise. And Cooper DeJean, the kid who had the pick six, was playing slot. He moved from the outside to the inside, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a significant change, and sort of learned it on the fly. This guy named Zach Bond, who'd been kind of a pass rush specialist and special teamer, it was the second best linebacker in the NFL. He'd never started before on a consistent basis, having played 4 years. Cam Jurgens, a guy that nobody knew last year, didn't have a very good rookie season playing right guard, but he was drafted to play center and replace Jason Kelce, Travis Kelce's brother, Taylor Swift's brother's boyfriend, Taylor Swift's boyfriend's brother, and arguably as good a player as Travis. Jason's going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. Cam Jurgens went to the Pro Bowl, essentially in his first year as a starter at center. Nolan Smith, a first-round pick from the year before, played great as the season went on, which compensated for the loss of Hassan Reddick, who was traded and replaced by Bryce Huff, who was horrible. So, and then Saquon Barkley has arguably the best season, not only of any Eagles running back, but of any running back ever. Those are 6 things you just can't predict.
Yeah.
All credit to Howie Roseman for putting those guys in those positions. But Howie will tell you he didn't expect any of them to produce the way that they produce. Produce, yes. Contribute, yes. But to produce at that level, except maybe Smith, no way.
And does that come down to the role of the head coach? Because this leads me on to my next point. Back in September, there was talk. I've got some neighbors across the road there. They're from Philadelphia, and they were telling us about...
My condolences.
I think they were still partying on Friday, by the way. I'm pointing like that they are literally just over there. But yeah, thank you very much. Their poor child is she's not 1 yet, and she's got all of the Philly gear. But there we are. Right. Philadelphia Eagles fans, they're going to be tuning in. They're going to be jealous. I'm pretty sure that the family, their daughter has been exposed to Philadelphia and a Philadelphia Christmas last year as well. So. Back in September, this is what they told me. They were telling me about over there where you are in Philadelphia, talk of 6 weeks Sirianni. And then we saw that the Eagles got off to that 2-2 start. They had their bye, didn't they, in week 5? So week 4, that was the infamous Sirianni having a go at the fans. And then what did he do afterwards? He sat in the news conference, didn't he? And he brought his children in, because if anything's going to charm the public, it'll be him with his children being the wonderful father that he is. But then coming away from the bye week, and they went on this fantastic run, which took them all the way to the Super Bowl and beyond now, because they have the Lombardi Trophy. So with all that collection of players and talents that Howie Roseman had put together, how much of that is Nick Sirianni and the job that he's done as a head coach? Because he seems, it's called Marmite over here. Marmite's like a yeasty product, and people either love it or you hate it. So Nick Sirianni is almost like Marmite in that regards, because people seem to either love him or hate him.
4 things happened after the bye week that were remarkable. Game 5, their game after the bye, Nick Sirianni taunted the fans during a game, or during and right after a game that they won. He was taunting them because he heard "Fire Nick Sirianni" chants at halftime, and then he wanted to hear them again after they'd won. In his mind, he'd shown everyone that he didn't deserve to be fired. In their mind, he'd just barely beaten a horrible Cleveland Browns team, and how dare you taunt us? So that led into the next day. First thing Nick Sirianni did was he apologized to his players for creating a distraction. No one in the organization understood the sin he had committed in the moment, because I talked to people in the organization and I advised them. I said, listen, you got to get out in front of this. What he did was completely unconscionable. It is a huge mistake. All you got to do is get out in front of it and say the right thing and do it right now. And they didn't. So it festered and it became a scar instead of a wound. You know what I mean? It's going to be there forever.
Yeah.
But he apologized to his players. And I talked to Lane Johnson about this. I said, listen, what effect do you think that had? Did it help you get to the Super Bowl? I was talking to him on the Wednesday or Thursday before the Super Bowl. He said, absolutely. It showed us that he was willing to be accountable for his mistakes, which made it easier for us to be accountable for ours. So that's the first thing. And maybe the least important, because again, we get back to players make plays. If the players are good, then bad coaching or, tough schedules or whatever don't matter. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Lane Johnson all came off injury after the bye week. Lane Johnson is the greatest Eagle ever. A.J. Brown's the greatest Eagles receiver ever. And he will be overtaken at some point, probably by Devontae Smith as the greatest receiver ever. They were missing 3 of their top 7 players. And, and had missed them to some degree, whether in-game or full games, during the first 4 weeks. They got healthy. 3 of the better players got healthy. Other things happened as well. The defense started playing faster because they got more accustomed to Vic Fangio's system. Cooper DeJean went from the bench, where he was relegated, mainly because of an injury in training camp. He was a little behind, to becoming a starter. That was big. And probably the biggest tactical change came from Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator, now the head coach in New Orleans, and Nick Sirianni agreeing that they were asking Jalen Hurts, the quarterback, to do a little bit too much. So they simplified his ask, gave the ball to Saquon Barkley more, and won every single game that Jalen Hurts both started and finished for the rest of the season.
Incredible. Yeah. That was the next point I was going to make. They seem to just establish the run. They worked to the strengths of the team, which was that incredible run game. And we saw the numbers that Saquon Barkley put up, which is why I was nodding vigorously when you brought that up, because that was a fundamental change, wasn't it? And something that the team massively benefited from going right through to the Super Bowl. Then, ironically, the Chiefs managed to stuff the run game somewhat, but you can't really say too much about that because Jalen Hurts was the leading rusher, but they did manage to contain Saquon Barkley in Super Bowl 59. With that defense, you mentioned Vic Fangio. I mean, it seems more of a rhetorical question, but how important was that appointment of Fangio? I mean, it seems massive.
Well, the genius of Vic Fangio, who I've covered relatively closely since I want to say like 2016. I think he was with the Bears, and their defense got to be pretty good, and his star was rising again. He became the head coach in Denver. So, I cover all the head coaches, right? So, and then he was an advisor in Philadelphia in 2022. The genius of Vic Fangio is that he doesn't ask his players to do what they can't do. And here's an example. They spent $51 million on Bryce Huff, who was a pass rushing specialist from the New York Jets. And they allowed Hassan Reddick, who was a defensive end, but also a great pass rusher, to be traded to the New York Jets, coincidentally. But it wasn't a trade 1-for-1. Bryce Huff was a free agent who signed here first, signed in Philadelphia before the trade. But everybody knew that Hassan was gone. They spent training camp, Vic spent training camp trying to change Bryce Huff into a normal defensive end, where he'd be asked to stop the run, he'd be asked to set the edge, he'd be asked to do things more than just rush the passer. And it became very apparent to Vic early on that that wasn't going to happen well. It was kind of a failed experiment. Either he needs more time or he just can't do it. And he was very honest with us about it. He was like, look, he's trying. He's not good at it yet, whatever. So by the 4th or 5th week, he stopped asking him to do it. He put other players in there. Brandon Graham got more playing time until he got hurt in week 12, I think it was. Josh Sweat stayed on the field more frequently. And Nolan Smith, the second-year defensive end, got a lot more playing time and got better. So they got from Nolan Smith what they'd hoped to get from Bryce Huff. I mean, they wanted to get it from both of them. But Vic Fangio realized the kid is producing. Bryce Huff either can't or won't. And Bryce Huff also got hurt. But Bryce Huff was a healthy scratch for the Super Bowl, which is astonishing, right? But that's who Vic Fangio is. He understood that Cooper DeJean, an outside corner at Iowa, could play slot. He understood that Quinyon Mitchell, coming out of training camp, was a better option on the outside as a cornerback than Isaiah Rodgers, a guy who'd been suspended the year before for gambling, but was a starting cornerback in the league. They had him. They had Isaiah Rodgers. They had Isaiah Rodgers on the roster because they drafted 2 young guys and they needed a veteran to sort of hold the fort. Well, the fort didn't need to be held. So that's the genius of Vic Fangio. Further genius, Howie got him a bunch of great players, including Zach Bond, who Vic Fangio realized very early on was a better linebacker than Devin. Oh goodness, I can't remember his last name. Devin White, who they signed hoping he would resurrect his career here. He didn't, but that was Vic Fangio again. He's like, okay, Devin White's not doing it. Zach Bond, who you never heard of, is going to get his shot. And Zach Bond wound up being the second best linebacker in the NFL. So that's your Vic Fangio answer. The best coaches are good teachers. But the best coaches also understand the limitations and the capacities of their good players. Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore understood by Game 5 the limitations and the capacities of Jalen Hurts. Vic Fangio, by Game 5, understood the limitations and capacities of players like Cooper DeJean, Nolan Smith, and Bryce Harper.
Incredible. Saquon's season, you mentioned it earlier, it's exceptional, a historical season. But, his yards before contact were miles above anybody else. Derrick Henry was the only other running back in the league to have more than 1,000 yards before contact. So there's my point to that is that the offensive line really did a great job, and it shows how strong that offensive line is for Saquon Barkley to be able to get those yards before contact. I mean, case in point in the NFC Championship game and that massive touchdown that he scored, his opening touchdown in that game against the Washington Commanders. So all credit, of course, because he is an exceptional and a phenomenal player. And what a historical season, offensive player of the year for Saquon Barkley. But that offensive line, man, that offensive line is at another level, isn't it? Lots of fans and teams complain about the strength of their offensive line, but Eagles fans, they can't, can they? Because, I mean, the tush push as well is just another example of how that unit operates and works so cohesively and well. But the fact that Saquon Barkley has managed to get all those yards before he's even touched just shows how well that unit works.
Listen, in 2013, well, in 1999, Andy Reid was hired as the Eagles head coach, and he impressed on the then president of the team, Joe Banner, is the guy that is in charge of the money, and Howie Roseman's mentor. The most important unit on the team is the offensive line. If we don't have an offensive line, it can't work. The first big acquisition they made was this guy named John Runyon, who was a kind of a thug, bully right tackle from Houston/Tennessee. It was when they were making the transition to pair with Trey Thomas. Since then, the offensive line, especially offensive tackle, has been a priority for the Eagles. If you look at their drafts, they'll draft and stash offensive tackles. In 2013, the Eagles hired as an assistant coach one of Chip Kelly's staff, a guy named Jeff Stoutland, who'd been the offensive line coach at Alabama. And I would argue that year to year for the past, I guess, 11 years now, 12 years, the first pick they made in that era was Lane Johnson. But I would argue that the best coach in the NFL doing his specific job, whether it's head coach, defensive backs coach, defensive coordinator, the best coach in the NFL has been Jeff Stoutland. And it's not close. The reason I say that is he took a guy like Jason Kelce, who was a 6th-round pick, and made him a Hall of Famer. They drafted Lane Johnson, who was a high school quarterback, and he's going to be a Hall of Famer. He made Brandon Brooks a Pro Bowl player. He did so much with so many average to slightly above average talents. And like this year, his greatest project is Jordan Mailata, the monstrous rugby player from Australia, who is probably going to be in the Hall. He's the best left tackle, the best offensive lineman in the league this year.
Mm-hmm.
But he also did things like he revived Mekhi Becton's career. Mekhi Becton was a first-round pick of the Jets. It was a flop. Moved him from tackle to guard out of necessity. It wasn't like Jeff Stoutland said, hey, let's get this guy and have him play guard. A guy named Tyler Steen got hurt. Mekhi Becton is going to make probably $30, $40 million over the next 5 years because Jeff Stoutland moved him to guard and taught him how to play guard. So to your point, Saquon Barkley is magnificent. The presence of Jalen Hurts, probably the 3rd or 4th best rushing quarterback statistically in the history of football. it was a huge benefit as well. And having two wide receivers like Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown also takes the heat off. But this is the best offensive line in football aggregate over the last 12 years since the arrival of Just Stoutland. And this might be the best addition of any of Stoutland's offensive lines, and by far the best offensive line in the NFL. To underscore that, not only did Saquon lead the league in yards before contact, Jalen Hurts led the league in time to throw in the pocket. But you cannot have a better season than that.
Incredible. It's like you're reading my mind, Marcus, when you're talking, because those watching on YouTube would have seen my hands lift when you mentioned Jordan Mailata. International player pathway success story this week over here in the UK. We've heard about Louis Rees-Zammit being, he's been put on the active roster for the Jacksonville Jaguars, so everybody's euphorious around Louis Rees-Zammit and the potential that he still has. But
it is Jacksonville.
It is Jacksonville.
The London Jaguars, we call them.
Only over here once this season. You know, what are they doing to his NFL? You know, you've treated us to 2 Jags games a year for the past couple of years. We only get with him once this year, but there we go. Look, Louis Rees-Zammit, good luck to him and the International Player Pathway program. But Jordan Mailata, man, you know, I spoke to him at Super Bowl 57. He was on the risers on an opening night. So it just shows the stature of the man that they selected him to be on the risers instead of walking around on the floor. But he's just a wonderful human being as well, isn't he? And like, you look at his story and his background, and you mentioned it there, the work that the coaching staff have done to get him to this point. But you couldn't be more happier for a player because he's just one of the nicest human beings around. The Philly fans must love him.
There's a real high bar for character in the Eagles locker room now. That wasn't always the case, even under Andy Reid. And sometimes the players were less team oriented than they should have been. But this team is very, very team oriented. And Mailata is an excellent example of that. I mean, he's very proud of what he's done, and he should be. You know, he's arguably the best offensive lineman in the league right now, and massive, and didn't play football as a youth. He was a rugby player in Australia, even though he was, you know, he's 6'8" and weighs 300 and, you know, probably 350, 60 pounds when he's not in shape, and probably 330, 340 now, and just beautifully athletic, wonderfully athletic. But to your point, he's probably a better man than he is a football player. He's very sensitive. I mean, I talked to him in the locker cleanout day last week, and he was still sort of sad that his father, who's ill, couldn't come to the game. And usually 29, 27, 28-year-old guys get over that by the time they have a Super Bowl ring and a parade, right? But he's very, very genuine, and he's typical. And a lot of this goes back to, not to get too deep in the weeds here, but I want to say like 2016, guy named Brandon Brooks, very good right guard. I think they signed him as a free agent, but he's a veteran. He was having some mental health issues, and he was wonderfully supported. And that was kind of like before the mental health springtime of, you know, mental health awareness. This was at the beginning of it, before that. And he was well supported by the team, the coach, and his teammates, like Lane Johnson, who has since acknowledged that he has mental health issues. And, you know, I mean, we kind of all do, right? I mean, none of us gets through the day without anxiety. So that culture was perfect for Mailata, who's a very genuine, very giving, very talented guy. And it's remarkable that that is true throughout the room. So they added, and I talked about this with Jordan the other day. They have added C.J. Gardner-Johnson twice, a safety who's very much a self-promoter and very like me. He got ejected from a game for taunting this year, as the mature version of C.J. Gardner-Johnson. A.J. Brown who, despite his protestations, is an actual diva. He has a sign on his locker that says, I'm always open. That's his Twitter and Instagram handle. All right. They had come into the organization Darius Slay, who had issues in Detroit with his coaches and wasn't supposed to be a great. They've absorbed all of that and turned those guys into leaders themselves. Even AJ Brown. AJ Brown was incredibly mature this year. He was incredibly selfless, incredibly under control. And that's part of that sort of aura that Jordan Mailata, as an outlier, really, a guy that has nothing in common in his background with these players and the sport. That's just who he is. But his personality is accepted because Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson and whoever else, Malcolm Jenkins, the guy who led the team in 2017-18 to the Super Bowl, the safety, they said, we're going to accept everyone. We're going to accept the, Joey Bosa types, and we're going to accept the Colin Kaepernick types. It doesn't matter who you are. As long as you're here and you're accountable and you show up, we're going to accept you. And that's been true since 2016-17 with Doug Peterson, who was hired to foster that environment. And Nick Sirianni has carried on that tradition.
So, sorry, Eagles fans, I know you're celebrating a Super Bowl, but we've got to look to the future, and we're coming to that point in the offseason now where cuts are being made and contracts are being renegotiated and contracts are up. There's never the same team 2 seasons in a row because of the cap situation, and that leads me to my next question. How are the Eagles looking heading into this offseason with the salary cap? And are there going to be any concerns for Eagles fans on that front?
Well, we can't know until they decide who they're going to cut, right? So Darius Slay is likely a $5 million salary cap savings. He's kind of come to terms with the fact that this was his last season as an Eagle anyway, right? So that may give them, instead of $13 million, $18 million to sign players with. But there are so many things that can happen with the salary cap. And I was fortunate because that guy, Joe Banner, I told you about earlier, he was a very patient teacher. And he is the person who solved the salary cap riddle for the entire industry. So all the things that he did in the mid to late 90s into the 2000s are being copycatted to this day. And I got to learn at the feet, right? Me and Howie. So we don't know. We don't know exactly what their decisions are going to be, so we can't say how much they're going to have. I think where you're going here is, okay, probably not going to have Darius Slay, their cornerback, back. What about Milton Williams, the sometime borderline starter defensive tackle who had 2 sacks at the Super Bowl? Josh Sweat, the defensive end, who had 2.5. And Zach Bond, the linebacker we were talking about, who's, a defensive player of the year candidate, right? They're not going to have all 3 back. And so you look at that, at least that's the big question here in Philadelphia, right? And Mekhi Becton, the offensive lineman we talked about, who resurrected his career. Those 4 guys they're probably not getting all four of them back. Becton is going to be very, very expensive for who he is. He's a pretty good player, but he's not a Pro Bowl player, at least not now, and probably won't be. He's pretty good, though. So he's gone. Then you start talking about Milton Williams, who had a great year, but has never been a starter. Can you afford to pay him starter money in his second contract? I don't think they're as interested in him or Sweat, who would be his 3rd contract, maybe his 4th if you count a renegotiation. But he's getting a little bit older, and he went away for about 4 or 5 weeks this year. He was invisible. To me, I think their priority has to be Zach Bond, the middle linebacker. In part because they don't have any other linebackers. Nakobe Dean is injured. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. isn't really a viable option at this point. Who knows where he is this time next year, but he doesn't seem to be a viable option at linebacker right now. And Zach Bond was probably their best all-around defensive performer in years since Brian Dawkins. It was just a wonderful season. Do you trust that is who he really is? If you do, then you've got an absolute versatile, 85% of the snaps, on the field all the time, healthy, smart, affable, versatile. He can cover. He can rush the quarterback. He gets tackles for loss. He's a good run stopper. You've got everything you want in a linebacker here, and letting him go would be kind of crazy, especially given his youth. He's only played 5 seasons, and the first 4 were very light duty. I think he had the second most snaps in the league this year, but he had more snaps this year. Yeah, I think he had 40% more snaps this year than his first 4 years combined. So there's a lot of rubber left on that tire. So if you want to extend him, or I guess you want to re-sign him for 4 or 5 years, that's probably a pretty good bet, especially since the last couple of years he'd be cuttable if something happens. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think the best performing story on our website yesterday was one written by a beat writer saying, okay, these are the issues with pending free agency and contracts and this and that, because they really like this team and they want to see it stay together. But the biggest, even a week after the Super Bowl, the biggest point of discussion is who's staying, who's going.
I've got a linebacker for you. He could slot right in. He knows Big Dom very well. Dre Greenlaw, bring him back to Philly. Reintroduce him with Big Dom. Big Dom, of course, had that altercation with Big Play Dre.
Well, here's the
season.
thing about that. Like, the reason they had the altercation is because they know each other.
Right.
Like, Dom felt comfortable telling him to, like, back off or go blank himself or whatever. And Dre was like, you're my boy. Why you embarrassing me like this? So it's like one of those things where they actually knew each other too well to give each other the respect and distance they needed in the moment.
There we go. You know what? He's coming off an Achilles injury. He'll probably be a 12-month prove it deal. So they could get big play Dre. Easy for me to say on the cheap. Get him on the sidelines with Big Dom. Now that would be fun to watch. Let's move away now momentarily from the Philadelphia Eagles, but we'll stick in Philly, of course, because my neighbors across the way, they're calling out. I can hear them say, ask him about the Phillies. Ask him about the Phillies. We were delighted to have the Philadelphia Phillies over here in London last year, and what a series we had at the London series against the Mets. I know the second game didn't go as planned from a Phillies perspective with that double play at the end. But I mean, what an exciting finish to that, and what a treat London fans had over here. But speaking of the Philadelphia Phillies and those pesky New York Mets who've got Juan Soto now, how far can the Phillies go? What are the expectations for the Phillies as we enter spring training, with now just on the horizon, just over a month away? I can see it, the start, opening day for the MLB season. Can they overcome the Mets in a postseason series this year? And more importantly, can they maintain the pace with those LA Dodgers? Is there hope for Phillies fans?
Well, I mean, they also have to be concerned with the Braves, right? I mean, the Braves have been the class of the National League East for years. They're in a very tough division, but they're a very, very good team. Nick Castellanos, who is he's an interesting character. He's kind of like the Keanu Reeves of Major League Baseball, kind of a Yogi Berra type. He put it very well. Like, they ran into a hot Mets team. The Mets weren't better than the Phillies last year. They were better for a week. They're a good team. The Mets are a very good team. The Phillies are a very good team. The Braves are a very good team. The Dodgers are a very good team. The reason I like baseball, the reason I like to cover baseball is because every single day a chapter is written in the book of the season. And you don't have these huge inflection points 7 days apart. And you don't sort of load manage your way through a season the way that basketball does, because you don't really know what you're going to get night to night roster-wise with basketball. Baseball, you kind of do. The same guys play 150 games a year. It's 162. Pretty much the same roster or lineup goes out there for 150 of them, and they write a book, right? It's a pretty good book. Bryce Harper's still in his prime. Zach Wheeler, it's funny, like by far the best athlete since 2020 in Philadelphia, the most productive has been Zach Wheeler, who is the number one starting pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies and the most anonymous superstar in the history of sports. I mean, he has been so good in the regular season, in the postseason, durability wise, teammate wise, mentoring. He's done every possible thing, but he's just not a dynamic personality. And he plays on the same team as Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper and, you know, other players who have much bigger profiles. Trey Turner. And he's well paid. Like, he's the third highest paid pitcher in the league. And he plays in Philly. It's not like he's playing Milwaukee or you know, Kansas City or Colorado. That said, this is a very, very good Phillies team. They should be in the hunt to win 95 to 100 games. They should be in the hunt. They should be favored to win the National League East, and they should be, you know, a viable World Series contender. A couple of things need to happen. The lineup needs to produce in the postseason. That's the reason they lost. The lineup didn't produce the last two postseasons. Houston was better than them 3 years ago. The Astros were a better team, but they were the better team the last two times they lost to the Diamondbacks and the Mets, but the lineup didn't produce. And everybody except really Bryce Harper, who is probably the best modern day postseason hitter alive. He's just spectacular. But the rest of the roster, the rest of the lineup didn't produce. And it also sort of depends how the bullpen shakes out. We never know year to year because the Phillies are kind of an analytics team in that one of the tenets of analytics in baseball, which is kind of the genesis of analytics in American sports, is you don't overpay for a closer and a setup guy. You pay very talented guys, preferably very talented young guys, to throw their arms off and hopefully figure it out. So the greatest challenge, really the greatest challenge for any manager, period, especially since the National League adopted the DH, is how am I going to manage my bullpen? That's become much more difficult and much more complex in the age of analytics. So I said all that to say, it depends on how Rob Thompson manages his bullpen and how those bullpen pieces produce and the roles they eventually settle into.
Look, we enjoyed having them over here, and Bryce Harper did not fail to disappoint the fans over here. We absolutely loved it. He put on a show over in London during the London series. Did they enjoy it? Do you know from your coverage of the team? I know you didn't come over for the London series, but did they have a good experience of the occasion over here?
Yeah, it's a very similar clubhouse to the Eagles locker room. And if you remember, the Eagles started the season in Brazil.
Yeah.
And gave up a home game to do it.
Yeah.
So the Phillies gave up a home game. I mean, each of them lost a home game. The Mets and the Phillies lost a home game. They don't care where they play. They love to play. Yeah. They really love to play baseball. They like to be around each other. They're very sheltered. Of all the animals in the zoo I cover, the baseball players are the least sophisticated. Mainly because, you know, it's really hard to do anything in the offseason because you're exhausted. And most of them have spent their lives sort of every day playing baseball. You don't get a whole lot of international trips the way you do in basketball and certainly hockey. So they took it as an opportunity to really enjoy the chance to go to London with their buddies, some of their families, their organization, and you guys really rolled out a wonderful red carpet for them. So it was a great experience. And if I'm not mistaken, the weather was pretty good.
It was good. It was hot.
For old Whitey, right? You're never guaranteed good weather. I've been to London 4 or 5 times myself, and you know I'm weatherproof. I don't really care what the weather is, but they kind of got a great experience. So to answer your question, yeah, they really liked it. They never want to do it again, you know, as an official, like, you know, event. But they're very proud of having done it, especially since Chase Utley, the international ambassador, is a former Philly. So yeah, it was a great. They actually had a little bit of a hangover. If you look at their performance coming back from London, some of the players didn't perform well after that trip. But again, it's not a whole lot different from going to the West Coast. It's a couple more hours and a couple more concerns, and you're playing, at 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever. But one of the things that we forget is these are very, very young men. These are kids. So, even the old ones are young. So it's not that big a deal for them to play at an odd hour in a strange place, eating odd food after a long plane flight. It's just another day.
Nice. Well, look, Marcus, it's never just another day when you join us on the Transatlantic Sports Show. So thank you very much for coming on today. And look, enjoy the off season with the Eagles, but of course, there's never any off season for us sports journalists. And as it sounds, you've got 162 games potentially with the Philadelphia Phillies to go out there and cover. But I mean, can it get much better than sitting out and a bowl game, baseball, just covering? There's something special and unique, isn't there, about
Listen, man,
baseball? Just
I gotta tell
it's
you,
great.
I will disabuse you of that notion. Okay, a ball game. If you're going to cover a baseball game in the major leagues, it's about an 8 to 10 hour day every day. You're dealing with the weather. You're dealing with your net. You're away from home half the time.
True.
And there is nothing in sports. There's nothing more, I guess, tiresome than covering the 100th game of a team that's going to win 75 games in the heat. Kids are getting ready to go back to school, and like you're wishing you get out of vacation. It is a slog. So I was a baseball writer for 7 years. Hats off to those guys. It's probably the toughest job in sports journalism. If there is a tough job in sports journalism, I mean, I don't really work for a living. I grew up on a farm. My dad was a brick mason. He worked for a living. I don't really work for a living, but of all the assignments, this bucolic and pastoral and ethereal experience that is baseball isn't that for us. It's very, very, very difficult. And it starts with 6 weeks away from home in spring training and ends, if the team's any good, with 4 weeks on the road in bad weather in October, November. So it's a real slog. So my hat is off to the baseball writers, who not only do they have a long, long season, they deal with the players and the manager twice a day, rain or shine, win or lose. It is really tough. So that is I guess, plea for sympathy from your audience. I will slink off the stage here as your audience goes to their real jobs.
Yeah, and they play their tiny violins. Marcus, what I meant to say was, enjoy being a baseball fan and enjoy the games that you get to go to as a fan, as a spectator. And you can sit there with the popcorn and your hot dog and your beer. There we are. Enjoy the spring and the summer, those special days when they come around. I know they're few and far between, but still, embrace it.
Experience. It's a wonderful experience for a sports fan to have a good baseball team in town, because you win a lot.
Yeah.
Winning as a sports fan is fun, and a good baseball team gives you lots of good feelings.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you very much, Marcus. Enjoy the months ahead.
Yeah.
And there goes Marcus Hayes from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Follow him on X at InkStainedWretch. His details are on the YouTube screen below. If you are listening, just check him out at InkStainedWretch, but that is Wretch without the W. There we are, Philadelphia Eagles fans. I mean, it never ends, does it? It's relentless, the NFL. There is no off season. I know the likes of Jeff Reinbold mention it quite often, but it's true. We're only a few days removed now from the NFL Combine, and all the attention then is on the NFL Draft, and there'll be lots of draft talk between now and the end of April, beginning of May, and then next thing you know, it's rookie mini camp, OTAs, then they shut down throughout the month of June, then it's training camp, and then we're back on it again, the treadmill that is the NFL. And we're going to cover it all here on the Transatlantic Sports Show, and we will give you some baseball content to boot. So a little bit of a taster there from Marcus Hayes, looking ahead to the Philadelphia Phillies and the season that Phillies fans and baseball fans can expect from that great franchise. I mean, we were treated to two very good MLB London Series games last year. It's a shame there is no London Series this year for us to cover and for you baseball fans to go and enjoy. But it will be back in 2026. So there's just a brief hiatus, I guess, from a baseball perspective in London for 2025, but back with a bang in 2026. And as soon as we get any information and details about that, we'll let you know right here on the Transatlantic Sports Show. In the meantime, as I say, we'll cover the big stories here on the Transatlantic Sports Show. So please give us a follow and a subscribe on at TASS_UK on social media, and you can find us on your podcast provider, and of course right here on YouTube. If you are watching, please tell a friend to tell a friend and all that jazz as well. And if you do like your American football and you like your sports history, then please go out and purchase a copy of my book, The Greatest American Football Story That Has Never Been Told. It does feature Philadelphia Eagle, who's one of the stars of that American football story, that great one that has never been told, Tommy Thompson. You want to learn more about him? Then please go out and purchase a copy of my book. It is available on Amazon. It was an Amazon bestseller. In the meantime, between now and our next show, we'll probably be looking back or looking ahead to the NFL Combine, some of the big stories connected with that. Thank you very much. We'll be back soon. Until next time.